Hi, I'm Mark Rossano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, coming to you from Primary Vision Network. We've been talking about the Three Gorges Dam for a couple of weeks now, and we figured it'd be good or at least beneficial to just do a deep dive on what is the Three Gorges Dam, why does this region matter so much, and it matters for a lot of reasons. It matters for the economy, for oil, gasoline, diesel demand. These key aspects for how is China going to handle their growth going forward, just given some of the issues that they're facing right now. So let's just, get right to it. And we have to start off with our favorite, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. So here you can kind of see this interesting breakdown in terms of where all of the interconnections are, how all of these different things matter. But the one place that we really want to, kind of zoom in on is this rail component. So you can see a lot of these rail different components where they connect into two different key pieces. One of them being the Silk Road economic belt, or what goes over land, and then what kind of goes straight down to the maritime Silk Road. So the Yangtze River is a key component for both of those. And the reason why is because things will either move up to the rail, or there's rail capacity right there, and then it picks up and goes straight over into Europe. Or it can go south, and it can actually go into the Southeast Asian countries, or just go straight into the ocean from there and into the rest of the world. It also, in terms of where the river actually terminates, it goes all the way to Shanghai. So you're talking about a huge amount of just capacity that can move up and down this river, which is why it has become such a focal point for industrial growth. And when we think about, first we talked about the overall interconnection, but now let's zoom in a little bit further and say, okay, well, how many trips per week actually leave from these core areas that are impacting the overall region? And now this is just back in 2018, and you can see 22 to 39. From these key areas of Wuhan, where the Yangtze is so important in terms of, just generating a significant amount of GDP for China in its own right. Now, just to be clear, this is 2018 data. So we know for a fact that it's actually increased exponentially as we went through 2019. And then in 2020, things actually shut down because of COVID. Now, there's been a certain amount of reopening. There's been some allowance in terms of shipments coming in and out. But again, those things remain hindered because not only just China, but also Russia and others are checking and testing the different rails and goods to make, I shouldn't say rails, but the cars, the goods, just to make sure that there isn't a COVID moving back and forth between the borders. But just think about the amount of capacity that this really dictates on the northern corridor, middle corridor, and southern. Now, the middle corridor is the one that we're going to talk about the most, because this is where the river is really dumping into, and then it can either go south into that South China Sea or into Southeast Asia. It can go east into Shanghai, or it can actually go west and go all the way over into Europe. And these are key aspects for integrating into the global market, and it actually accounts for, I think in 2018, it was 518 billion US dollars worth of trade. And I know in 2019 that they were expecting something closer to about 750. Now, we still don't really know if we've really gotten there. Those calculations haven't come out yet, but you can get an idea of just the sheer size. Now, the GDP of this whole, and we're going to call it the Yangtze River Economic Basin, is technically the third largest economy in the world. Now, that can give or take, but it's, just the amount of GDP generated in this area is above Japan and Canada, just kind of thinking about sheer size. Now, Japan kind of jumped back above, but again, you get the idea of how important this is. Now, the reason why we're talking about this is because the Minister of Water Resources, so they've said that 93 rivers remain above warning levels, adding to the Three Gorges Dam reservoir, and in terms of the overall pain that is being experienced, just given this flooding that is really historic in size and something that they haven't seen in decades. And when we think about these, again, these are the different components in terms of coming south. It's important to appreciate why it's so important for these other regions, because this is a huge trade route. Now, the trade route continues into the cross-border. There's been a lot of issues, and this is why we've talked about the 9-dash line and the political issues that we've seen. So, last week and the week before, we talked about the trade issues that China is facing, because the trade issues right now, not only just with the U.S., but also with other countries in terms of, political problems, military issue, flare-ups. It's gonna have an economic impact due to the amount of trade that moves between a lot of these countries. Now, this is just one example of the different trade routes that these goods can take into this region. Now, if you think about why this is so important, you have to think about the Strait of Malacca and how important it is for China, because you're moving closer to the actual entrance into the rest of the world, which is why it's so important and why it helps cut costs, which is part of the reason why we've seen a significant amount of things move into this region. So this is a chart that we've seen before, and we just want to really kind of highlight why the flooding has been so pronounced in specific regions. And it's just the inherent low-lying levels, because, obviously rivers cut through, they then flood, deposit silt. So you have a significant amount of regions that have, come down this and really are at risk, not just from a potential cataclysmic collapse of the dam, but just the sheer size of the flooding that has been passed through from the dam down into the rest of the basin. And this is why we've seen continuous flooding through the different regions, impacting close to 4 million people, countless cities. But just to kind of put into perspective, like who's impacted? Well, some 175 cities are located on these different banks that have attracted a significant amount of international interest, not just Chinese interest. Companies like Apple, Walmart, DuPont, Nike, H&M, all have facilities and manufacturing on within this delta. And the reason why is because, one, you have a lot of natural resources that you can bring to the levels. You have cheap labor in terms of, you're moving further inland with China, and China's incentivized the creation of new economic hotspots outside of the coast. So as you've moved in, you've had, benefits in terms of tax breaks, in terms of incentives, and you just have cheaper workforce because, the cost of living there is going to be different than in Shanghai. But you also have access to great markets, Shanghai, Beijing, different areas that are going to be, hotbeds of future growth for your products, specifically things like Nike and H&M, which is you want to take advantage of. And that's why this is going to have a wide-reaching impact, because the new breakdown in terms of where things are, nearly half of the country's GDP is generated in this region, in this picture. So right now we have to think about, okay, well, you have China, which reported GDP of growth in Q2 of 3.2%. You have PMIs that are still positive coming in, manufacturing PMI of 50.8%, but yet you're experiencing record flooding. These are the different components that it's hard to really kind of say, well, you're growing, but not only are you facing a resurgence of COVID, but you're also facing a huge amount of flooding and problems within your basin. And your trade partners are also fighting with you on a political, military level and trade war level, but also the fact that they're experiencing their own COVID issues, which is just inherently destroying their own local economies and is going to cut imports from China. So just to go through in a bit more depth in terms of, okay, well, what are the cities? Who's impacted? How broad could this be as things continue to get worse? And here you get the different breakdowns of the three different regions and the number of cities and the population within those cities. So again, you can see the GDP in trillions of dollars. Now, this isn't in US dollars, but you can get the sheer size and why when we can say that this is a huge component for Chinese GDP. Some different breakdowns in terms of the different areas in which the river actually, focuses on. There's 225,000 square kilometers, representing 163.3 million people, and that's just in a portion of this. So you get the sheer size, and then its economic output was in 2018 of the YRD, or the development zone, was 20% of China's total GDP, but yet 39% of the country's total foreign direct investment. Now, we know that it's increased in terms of what it's delivered to total GDP over the last 3 years, coming much closer to almost half of the country's GDP. But again, remember the Apple, H&M, 39% of total foreign direct investment. So now there's foreign companies that will get impacted that we really haven't considered what that would be on as we go further through the different time periods. Now, when we think about flooding and we talk about what is happening at the dam, what is the problems? We've talked about the issues. Now let's think about this in terms of what could happen if there is a structural failure. Now, structural failure, the dam was built in segments. So typically with a dam, you want to fill it, at the same time so that you don't have an issue in terms of cement drying faster than others. So you build cement facilities, you fill everything, and you really ensure protection in terms of the continuity. Now, because of the sheer size of the dam, it was actually built in stages. So by building it in stages, there are areas which could be potential weak points. And there's been a horizontal shift in the dam itself. Now, in terms of what does that shift means, it means that the segments aren't actually fully unified. So you can have a horizontal move, which can then lead to leaking. Now, the shifts that they've actually, people saw through satellites and were denied, and now they're actually saying, yes, no, the dam did shift, but it doesn't move past the engineering breaking point, which just means that there's a certain amount of movement that can be allowed without causing structural damage. Now, that can always be up for debate of what kind of structural move could cause damage. And just to think about, why this would be so problematic, there's 33 rivers that are at record highs, and there's alerts that have been issued for a total of 433 rivers as of July 13th, with some of those rivers remaining at record levels. And it's, again, the inherent problem for what is actually currently happening. Now, when we think about how is the dam built, we have to consider, okay, well, what are the different spillways? So there's 23 bottom outlets that are about 79 meters, in terms of just the diameter, the actual size of them. And then there's 22 sluice gates, or gates that can open at the top. And typically you only open about 7 gates at a time, just because you don't want to essentially create this gravitational pull where all of the water pours in and it actually bends inward. But the maximum capacity is about 116,000 cubic meters in terms of the actual movement of water from one side to the other. Now, the problem that has been brought up multiple times, and this dam barely passed Congress because you had a little bit, I think it was about 40% of the people either didn't vote or voted against the building of the dam due to the uncertainty on the scientific level. And the reason why there was concern was there was a belief that there was not enough research done in terms of the silt and the silt buildups that would actually put pressure on the dam. There wasn't enough research on just inherent flow of the water itself. And that really led to, well, how deep do you have to go? How deep into the bedrock to ensure that the water doesn't try to work around it, and you have enough of a foundation to protect against some of these surges, because the dam was supposed to be built to handle a flood that comes once every 200 years, if you will. But we are in the year 2020, so why not? And at the same time, there was also an inherent concern about construction capacity. Like, can they actually do it given the way they were going to build it? And what was the quality of the rebar and cement that was used? So these are problems that we have to consider when we start thinking about, another wave of flooding that is going to hit the dam. And when we look at the numbers, some of again, it's tough because people don't like the CCP, so things can originate from the Taiwanese newspaper or within China. There was a view that this dam was going to essentially protect flooding. This was going to stop flooding, and they were going to be able to manage. So based on just rough estimates from some different scientists and experts, is that this has only stopped about 9% of the floodwaters. So why have a dam that cost, billions of dollars to stop 9% of flooding? Would it really have been that worse if it wasn't there? And that's where we're up for debate in terms of what is the actual flood management that was delivered. So, just so far, there's been about 141 deaths. There's been about 28,000 homes impacted, and it's affected about 38 million people. And it's caused about $8.6 billion of US dollars of economic damage. So, and it's not done yet. And this is why we keep coming back to, well, how are you achieving such growth if you have such problems in terms of a core economic industrial hub? So this is why we continue to look at this, because it's like, all right, well, we know Sinopec has cut rates. We know that you have a gigantic build of oil sitting offshore. We know that you've created bottlenecks within the ports because trade is slowing, but yet you're growing. And this is why we don't just want to say, oh, China's lying. No, we want to dig in and say, well, how much are they lying? What are the real numbers? And that's why when we look at this, not only is there a potential loss of life and a catastrophic failure, but this is now the second time that the dam has been challenged in the last 3 years. We've had a horizontal shift that has caused leaking, cracking, and other problems along fault lines, which, the question is, does it now get weaker? If we get another flood in 2021 or 2022, are we going to see a continual collapse or an integrity problem continue to get more pronounced? And this is something to consider, especially as, climate change continues. You have, shifts in the patterns in the monsoon seasons could get bigger in terms of just where things are. And all of a sudden, this pain and this stress continues to run. So these are just some things that we're going to consider. China is obviously a huge focus for us, just given the amount of oil they consume and the growth trajectory that is always assumed in people's numbers, OPEC, EIA, IEA, in terms of the actual demand China has for oil, as well as gasoline and distillate. So these are key aspects that could really drive the market, just given the fact that they're a huge consumer of these different products. So thanks again for watching. I hope you appreciated the update. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments section. I think this is a great place for kind of Q&A. We tried to keep the tinfoil hat off in terms of, this is definitely going to collapse, but it's something that we have to watch because it could have a catastrophic effect, as we look at just the potential loss of life, business, and other that we always want to consider. So thanks again for watching. I'm Mark Rossano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, coming to you from Primary Vision Network. I hope you're having a great weekend. Thanks.